Welcome to Delivering Miracles, a podcast to teach women like you tips and strategies on how you can have a safer pregnancy so you can bring home a healthy baby. I'm your host and your high-risk pregnancy expert, Parijat Deshpande. I can't wait to chat with you. I was just talking to a friend recently. We were talking about infertility, building your family, growing your family, having children. She has one daughter already who's about 3.5. And she was conceived via IVF, and so they knew that they'd have trouble the second time around. And so they started the IVF process really early, probably sooner than they would have had she been able to conceive naturally. They just had to start sooner because they know the realities of IVF. It doesn't always work the first time. Most of the time, it actually doesn't work the first time. And they did 5 rounds of IVF. And none of the embryos took. She had a miscarriage with one of them, and the rest of them were failed cycles. And she finished out all of the remaining embryos that they had. And that was it. They didn't have any more. There was nothing left. And she and her husband were devastated. They were so sad because they wanted to have another child. But they didn't have any embryos left, and she was older. She didn't think that it was prudent to do another egg retrieval. They didn't want to consider donor eggs or donor embryos, and so they were done. And they stopped trying, and now they have this 3.5-year-old daughter at home, and they're very grateful for her. But what stood out to me was when she told me that the reaction from many of her friends and family members was, well, at least you got one. You should be grateful for your daughter. And she told me that hearing that was such an awful experience when she was really sad about the fact that she couldn't have another child. And then she said that she felt guilty for feeling sad because she felt like, hey, maybe I'm supposed to be over this, but maybe this isn't a big deal. Maybe I'm making a bigger deal out of it than it is. I mean, yeah, there are people who don't have children at all. I should be grateful for my little girl. To which I stopped her and I said, does that mean you're not grateful for her? And she didn't say anything for a couple minutes. And then she kind of furrowed her eyebrows and thought, well, no, of course I'm grateful for her. I had to fight for her. I had to go through so many hurdles just to have her. Of course I'm grateful for her. So then why is this tied to your gratitude? And that's where the conversation took us. And it made my blood boil to hear her talking like this, to hear her doubting her own gratitude because people around her weren't giving her the space to grieve. Therese Rando, an author on grief, says it perfectly. Grief is a reaction to all kinds of losses, not just death. Grief is based upon your unique, individualistic perception of the loss. What that means is there is no judgment on loss because it's individual and it's unique to you and you only. What might hurt you may not hurt me that deeply, and vice versa. But there needs to be no judgment about this. And yet I hear about it and I see it all the time. Through the work that I do with my clients, when I'm talking to friends like this one, even in my own personal life, right? There's so many types of losses that you have during your infertility journey when you have a high-risk pregnancy that are not related to death necessarily, but are not valued and are leaving you feeling like you need to doubt yourself or that you're not okay, and it's not okay to actually mourn that loss. These are losses of things like the loss of a dream pregnancy. I have several friends actually who adopted children because they tried fertility treatment and they couldn't get pregnant. And many of them have 1, 2, 3 children through adoption. But if you really listen to them, they're still sad because they missed out on being pregnant and delivering their child. Does that mean they're not grateful for the child they do have? Of course not. I have a friend who is so good about talking about this that she honors her pregnancy losses every year. And she's very vocal about it because she wants the stigma to end, which I love about her. And she always hears, well, at least you have a daughter. There are some people who can't even afford to adopt. It's the worst thing you can say to somebody to minimize their grief. The loss of a dream pregnancy is a very real loss. There's also the loss of a dream delivery. I hear this from my preemie moms all the time, and I know I felt it too. When you deliver too soon, when the environment and the situation around the delivery is traumatic, you had this vision of how you wanted to welcome your child into the world. In my case, he came out in 12 minutes, 1 3-second push, and I didn't get to see him for 3 hours, and we didn't know if he would survive. That's not what any mom wants for her child when he or she is born. And that loss of that dream delivery, what you wanted that to look like, that's real. That's real. There's the loss of the vision of what your family could have looked like. I'm thinking about the friend that I told you about earlier just a few minutes ago. She wanted to have more children. She wanted to have 2 children. She wanted to have 2 children and now she can't. They've chosen not to. They've chosen not to continue. And there's a real loss. So whether you can't have children at all, whether you have 4 and you wanted 5, whether you've experienced the death of a child as a miscarriage, ectopic pregnancy, stillbirth, prematurity, whatever has happened to you, and whatever you've gone through, your loss is real. We have to stop with this loss Olympics, if you will. There's no comparison. Loss is loss. Mourning is mourning. You do not need to compare it or justify it for it to be valid. There's no table on which you put your loss and say, where does it rank? How sad am I allowed to be? It is ridiculous that is the message women are getting when they're fighting for their family. One of the best lessons that I learned when I was going through graduate school in clinical psychology happened really early on in my training. I was in this tiny little room. It was my very first office, and I'll never forget it. Me and my office mate, we set it up with this like cool beachy vibe with the blues and the greens, and there were these white walls. It just felt very soothing and calming, and we were just really excited to jump in and start helping people. And one of my very first clients was a young woman, like early to mid-20s. And she experienced a death in her family. Now, on this episode, we're talking about loss being anything, including death. It doesn't have to be death, though. But in this case, she had lost a family member. And I remember, I will never forget this moment. We're sitting, I want to say maybe 5 feet apart, maybe 6 feet apart. And she's sitting in her chair with these beautiful puffy cushions that we got to try to make our clients comfortable. And she bursts into tears. And she's sobbing. I've got Kleenex on one side of her, which I pointed out to her. But my instinct was, what do you do when somebody's crying? You want to make them feel better. And I wanted to go sit next to her and I wanted to tell her everything's going to be okay. I was young too. This was one of my very first clients and I was still learning and I wanted to make it better for her. But that's not what we do, right? So in that moment and in the room, I sat there. And I heard her crying and I saw her wiping her tears. I saw her body shaking from her sobs. I saw her hair getting wet from the tears. And I remember thinking this moment was going on forever. What's going to happen now? What's going to happen? How do I get out of this situation? How do I help her bring it all together? And I just sat there and I waited. Part of it was because I didn't know what to do because I was very new at this. And part of it was because it felt like it was the right thing to do. And so I waited. And you know what happened? Biggest lesson, one of my most life-changing lessons I've ever learned in my training. You know what happened? Slowly her sobs turned into little whimpers. And slowly those whimpers turned into sniffles, and eventually she looked up. And her eyes were puffy and they were red, and her face was just completely wet from all the tears that she had just shed. And you know what she said to me? Thank you. I haven't been able to do that anywhere. And it was this extremely profound moment that I will never forget, because you know what that shows? You know what that tells us? Is that it is so important that we give grief space. It's important to remember that it's, in that moment, it wasn't my job to shape her grief or to mold it or to put it in a box that made it comfortable for me. It wasn't my job to name it or to qualify it. There didn't need to be words for it. That's not my job, because it's her grief. So when you're experiencing your grief, you're hearing from other people, put it away. It's not that bad. It's not a big deal. Just be happy, be grateful, be appreciative. That's them trying to put your grief somewhere. And you know what the thing is, though? Our bodies are designed to be able to handle grief. And that's the transformation that I saw in the room that forever changed me. That transformation of just letting it out so that you can pull it back in. It's like when you have to clean out the attic or the storage space in your house. You have to pull it all out to be able to see what's going on, to see what you've jammed in there before you can do any kind of deep cleaning and deep organizing that'll actually make a difference, right? You got to pull it all out. And then you see it all, and then you see what parts of it can I throw away? What parts do I want to keep? And then you are putting it all back. That is how our minds work. That is how grief works. You've got to let it out. Because your body is made to heal. Each and every one of us. Our bodies are made to heal. You will begin the healing process from your loss. It will happen. I know when you're in the thick of it, it feels like it'll never happen. You're going to be stuck here forever. That's not true. Our bodies are designed to heal. The same way that when you cut yourself, you get a paper cut in your hand, and all of a sudden, within seconds or minutes, you've got cells rushing to that open wound, trying to close it off, right? To protect you from infection. The same thing is happening emotionally. Your body will heal. You've got to give it time and the opportunity to do so. There's no timeline. It doesn't happen in days or weeks or even months necessarily, but it will happen. Grief is not the same as depression. You can be extremely sad. You can be extremely sad about a loss. And that, again, it doesn't have to be a loss due to death. It can be the loss of wishing you had a maternity photo shoot. It can be the loss of wishing your partner had been in the room when you delivered. It can be the loss of making decisions about how you wanted to deliver. All of those things are legitimate and they're valid. Loss is loss. You do not need to compare it or justify it for it to be valid. But squashing it, minimizing it, believing these insensitive comments that you're taking too long or it shouldn't be this big of a deal, they're hurting your chances of healing. And I don't want that for you. We have this idea that grief should be simple and easily packaged up and neat and nice. Kind of like my feeling that I wanted to do for my client in the room. I wanted to fix it for her. I wanted it to be nicer. I wanted, and huge lesson right there that it's not nice. It's not pleasant and it doesn't have to be. And my own discomfort with that in the room could have affected her and her ability to heal had I stepped in. And now, of course, we can't expect our loved ones to know that. They love us. They want to protect us. They want to make it better for us. But your job is to know and to give yourself permission to say, hey, you know what? I know you're trying to make me feel better, but not right now. Right now, I need to feel it. Let's stop over pathologizing everything. Grief doesn't always mean there's something wrong with you. And it doesn't matter what the loss is that you're mourning. Loss is loss, right? You don't need to compare it or justify it for it to be valid. We see how many women experiencing postpartum depression, postpartum anxiety, the numbers are going through the roof. More and more women are coming out and talking about it, which is fantastic. But the question that comes in my mind is why? Why are there so many women who are struggling? And you look at this and it makes sense. It's no wonder so many women are struggling because we expect women to put away their sad feelings, their grief, to compare it with others, and then let it be okay that they feel guilty for the way that they're feeling. It's insane. We have to stop. We have to be okay with the fact that life is messy and ugly sometimes. Because that's where healing comes from. You open it up, you let it have its space, you honor it, you respect it without judgment, and watch what happens. It's incredible. That's when true healing begins. Now, I know what you're thinking. How long do I give it space? How long do I do this for? It feels awful. I just want to feel better again. And I'll be really honest with you. Grief is not something that you can just swipe right and say, next, I'm done with you. It doesn't work that way. You've got to give it the time that you need. And I'll tell you this, I've said it before and I'll say it again. Your body is designed to heal, and it will heal. And you've just got to pay attention to the signs that it's telling you it's ready to heal. And I'll tell you how that looks sometimes. You might be in the middle of grief. I've seen this with a couple of clients who had preemies. I do a lot of postpartum healing work. I have a Healing Hearts program designed exactly for this. And what comes up a lot really frequently is, I wish I'd carried to term. They've got their babies at home. Baby survived, what was in the NICU, but came home. Sometimes the baby is just a baby. Sometimes baby's a toddler. Baby's okay, but there's this loss of, I wish I could have carried to term, which I personally completely understand. And the tide starts turning and you start getting signals of you're ready to think about it and you're ready to move on to the next phase of healing, is when automatically you start finding joy in the moments. Now, I say automatically I don't mean it as in if it happens in time. You do have to do the work. Time isn't enough. We've talked about this on this podcast all the time. But you start noticing that your thoughts do become more positive. They do become more focused on gratitude. There's a reframing of your grief by talking about it, not using judgmental words like, well, at least I was able to carry this long, or, hey, at least I have a child at home, or I should just be grateful. Those are the words that are very judgmental. Those are the words when you're trying to force yourself to heal. When it's actually happening organically, when you're doing the work, it comes more naturally, where you start finding joy in the little moments. And this is what I tell all my clients is, that you're on the process of healing when you can feel joy and grief at the same time. You can feel your heart broken and be exploding in gratitude at the same time. And it absolutely happens. It happens to each and every one of my clients when I work with them. It's happened to me, and it will happen for you. But you've got to do the work, and that starts with acknowledging and really giving yourself space to understand that loss is loss, and you do not need to compare it to anybody, or you do not have to justify it for it to be valid. You're going to hear all kinds of insensitive comments throughout your life, and I know you've already heard them. Hey, at least you can have children, or hey, just adopt, or just be positive, or just relax, or hey, be grateful that you can get pregnant, or this was God's plan, or whatever it is. You're going to hear this stuff. It's your job to make sure it doesn't get all the way in. As someone who's been doing grief work professionally for over 10 years, let me tell you this. If you don't deal with your grief, it will not go away. It will sit, it will fester, it will grow bigger, and it will cause you health problems. So remind yourself that grieving is not the same as complaining. It's not being ungrateful. You can be grateful and grieving at the same time. They are not mutually exclusive emotions. So what do you do when you have experienced a loss? Now, again, let's recap here. Loss, we're talking about anything. It's individualized, right? It's defined by each and every one of us. There's no one thing. So it can be miscarriage, ectopic, stillbirth, losing a baby because it was born too soon. But it can also be the loss of your dream pregnancy, the loss of your dream delivery, the loss of how big you wanted your family to be. Anything like that is considered a loss, and it's valid, okay? Don't judge yourself as you're thinking about what you've been through, all right? So what do you do once you've experienced a loss to give yourself the opportunity to really, truly heal from it so it's not hanging with you for the rest of your life? There's really just two things. It's that simple. 2 things. Number 1 is to name it. Call it out, own it. It's yours. People are afraid of doing this because they're afraid that if I do that, it's going to feel so big and so overwhelming that I'd rather just not look at it. But it actually works the opposite. When you own it and you truly acknowledge it, it shrinks. It loses its power and it suddenly becomes something that you can manage. So name it. Put words to it. What is that loss? I wished I'd had a baby shower. I wished that I could have more children. I wish I didn't lose 3 of my babies to miscarriage. What is that? Name it. Call it out. And number 2 is to ride the waves. Don't fight them. Have complete trust that your body knows when it's time to heal. Your job is to listen to those signals and to give your body what it needs. But it does know when to heal, and you have to trust that. So there's 2 things, just 2 things you've got to do when you notice that you have experienced a loss. Name it and call it out. And number 2 is to ride the waves. Don't fight it. Now, if you find yourself comparing yourself to others, which will happen because it's hard not to, but if you notice yourself thinking about XYZ person in your life and thinking, I don't know what she's complaining about, at least she can, and you start thinking that way, at least she can have a child. Hey, at least she has money for fertility treatment. At least she can exercise during pregnancy. If you start noticing those thoughts, that is your signal that your body is telling you to look inward. Because there's a big chunk of grief that's unresolved and it's getting triggered right now. And your body's saying, pay attention. So turn inward. Look at it and name it. What is this bringing up for you? What is that loss that's being triggered right now? Name it exactly what it is that's coming up for you. Own it. Now, if you're on the other side of the spectrum and you find yourself comparing yourself to, your neighbor or your sister or your friend or whatever and thinking, man, I shouldn't feel so bad. Things could be so much worse right now. At least I have one child. I feel so guilty for thinking this way. I feel so guilty for wanting more children. I feel so selfish for wanting more when other people can't even have children. If you find yourself thinking that, this is what I want you to remind yourself. If you think you don't deserve to grieve and honor your loss because things could be worse, you don't deserve to be happy because things could always be better. Let that sink in for a second, right? You see how ridiculous that sounds when I flip it around and say it the other way? But it's the exact same concept. You can't pick and choose how you compare your life and how you experience your emotions. It doesn't work that way. So instead of judging your emotions, whatever they are, stop comparing. Turn inward. Name your loss without judgment and own it. And then ride the waves as you heal. I'm so passionate about this, if you can't tell already. I'm so done with the way that we talk about loss and the way that we compare and these loss Olympics of who's got it worse and who has it better. And it's so awful that we do this to women. So here is what I would love for you to do, because I want this to change and I want it to change right now. So if you're ready to get on board with me to change the rhetoric that we have around loss, I want you to head over to Twitter and tweet at me using hashtag #LossIsLoss, LossIsLoss, and tell me what you're mourning. Don't filter yourself. Don't qualify the loss to see which one's the biggest and which one sounds more worth it to say. Go to step 1. Own it. Name it. What is that thing that you're mourning? Is it the loss of a baby after a chemical pregnancy? Is it wishing you had 4 children when you only have 2? Is it wishing you had more embryos? Is it wishing you had a baby shower during your pregnancy? What is that? Name it and head over to Twitter and tell me, and you will get my support. If you're not on Twitter, come over to Instagram. My handle for both is Parijat Desh, Parijatdesh. And in my gallery, you'll see an image that just has the words #LossIsLoss on it. Find that image and leave your comments under that image. Tell me, what are you mourning? No judgment, no filters. You name it, you own it, and that is how you will begin to heal. You've got my support. We've got to stop how we're talking about this, and we have to help each other heal. And I am here with you every step of the way to do that. So find me, tweet at me, leave a comment. I am here for you. Your loss is your loss. Whatever that loss is. You don't have to compare it or justify it for it to be valid. It's valid all on its own. Gosh, you should see me right now. My face is all red and hot because I'm so worked up about this. And this is something that's very close to my heart because I've experienced it too personally. So I feel you. I know how hard it is, but I know that we can do this. We do this together. We can change the way we talk about this. Rumi, wise old Rumi, has a beautiful quote that I want to leave you with to really remind you of what this is about. Grief can be the garden of compassion. If you keep your heart open through everything, your pain can become your greatest ally in your life's search for love and wisdom. Healing can be yours, and it will be. It starts with remembering that your loss is valid. Thank you so much for joining me here today. If you want personalized support on how to mourn your losses, whatever they may be, whether it's wishing you had a maternity photo shoot, or wishing you had more children, or wishing you had any children at all, whatever that is, schedule a consultation on my website. I'm here for you. You can do that at parijatdeshpande.com. And you have my Twitter and Instagram, so come over, say hi, and tell me what you're mourning. Let's get this movement going. Find me at Parijat Desh on Twitter or Instagram. That's PARIJATDESH. And don't forget the hashtag #LossIsLoss. Not everyone will understand or be compassionate toward your grief journey. You're going to hear hurtful and sensitive comments along the way, and I'm sure you already have. But by trusting your body and knowing that grief is a process that you can heal from, these comments won't hurt this much all the time. But most importantly, you will be a stronger person, more able to fully enjoy the life you have because you've done this work to truly heal. And it starts with remembering that you never have to compare or justify your loss for it to be valid. Take it one day, one step at a time. You can do this.